Hello, welcome on our panel discussion, how to stay with the trouble, art institutions and the environmental crisis. Let me start from a technical remarks. The discussion will be basically English, but I will wanna start with Polish, and also the audience is invited to speak in Polish, is it preferred. So for people who don't use both languages, we would like to invite you to have the translator devices. Dyskusja zasadnicza będzie po angielsku, w związku z czym jeśli
The basic discussion will be held in English, so if you would like to use the headsets in order to listen to the interpretation, please feel free to take the headsets. First of all, I would like to thank the curator of the debate, Magda Ziółkowska, who invited some wonderful guests here, and she's with us at the audience, and I hope that at a time she will enter to participate. Let me introduce the guests from the left. I'd like to present Ms. Mira Gakjina, historian, art critic, senior curator and director of Skopje Contemporary Art Museum. Defne Ayas, also a curator and director in Korea. In the years 2012-2017, she was director of Vita de Witt Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam. Then Viviana, Checchia, curator, critic and lecturer, currently the public engagement curator at the Center for Contemporary Art in Glasgow. And Szefer Karlsen, curator, writer, editor and educator, currently works as a professor in curatorial practice and course director for MA curatorial practice at the Faculty of Fine Art, Music and Design, University of Bergen. Unfortunately, Tandazani Dhlakama couldn't come here because of some problems related with visa. Tandazani is an assistant curator at Zait's OCAA in Cape Town. It's a pity that she can't present her point of view in today's discussion, but well, the Schengen bureaucracy resulted impossible to cope with in the context of today. Our debate is related with two exhibitions, Human Free Earth and the plasticity of the earth, forensic architecture as well. And we're going to discuss the environmental crisis and thinking about the irreversibility of the changes that take place, and an attempt to understand how a different kind of environment is appearing within these changes or crises. Of course, being aware of that is not everything. It's also important how to tackle the crisis, how to provide an answer for the crisis, because without that, any responsibility wouldn't be possible. In the title of our debate, we refer to Dana Haraway. She proposed a slogan while trying to find an answer for the environmental crisis. So stay with the trouble, not ignore them. In practice, staying with the trouble means creating myths that would allow us to construct differently our relations within the environment. For this debate, we would like to narrow it down to the question how contemporary art, and especially its institutions, can stay with the trouble. How can they answer to this environmental crisis? And these questions are a challenge for the dominating model not so long ago. So the question is such a model possible? An engaged institution would be an answer, maybe? And if so, what are the possibilities of such an engagement? So these are the questions that we would like to discuss today, and we've invited our guests, also asked them to prepare some short presentations And after these short presentations, that will be an introduction to our debate. We'll have the debate itself, and of course you will be able to ask questions. Now, Anne Szefer Karlsen, please begin.
Yours.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the wonderful hospitality that we've had over the last few days. I'm not entirely sure how the PowerPoint will appear on the screen, but maybe it will magically appear on the screen. Thank you. Wonderful. So, I didn't... my Polish is a bit rusty, so I didn't get the introduction, but I'm assuming it was more or less what we've been introduced to in email previously. And I will, because of time, I will actually read you a very short presentation. And the reason is because we're also trying to make content for a book, which is coming, which I'm not sure if you mentioned, but that's also part of our assignment here today. So this is really the first stab at something that hopefully is a text in less than 8 weeks. Let's see if it works. So my name is Anna, as you can see here, and I have proposed a title which is Creating New Cultural Protocols. And as I was preparing for this talk, I had to procrastinate a little bit. So I went to a lecture organized by the curatorial initiative Volt in Bergen, which is a one-woman band in many ways. It's a one-person curatorial initiative, which manages to deliver institutional, in quotation marks, level thinking, production, and mediation, while all the time only being one person. So this person is Marie Neland, and she had brought T.J. Dimas to Bergen, and I went to this talk that was extremely relevant for what we're discussing here today. So I shouldn't really digress too much, but I wanted to start with the quote from a text that was mentioned during this lecture. It's titled Ecology as Intersectionality. It was published and is openly available online. It was published in spring 2019. And T.J. Dimas is a professor of the history of art and visual culture and director of the Center of Creative Ecologies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And because the quote is quite long, I've put it up there on the screen. And he writes, in our emergency times of disastrous environmental transformation, it's urgent to bridge aesthetics and politics, expanding consideration of these entanglements in ways that challenge white supremacy, the militarization of everyday life, creeping fascism, and apocalyptic populism, as well as mass extinction, fast and slow environmental violence, and extractive capital. So as you can hear, this text is really written to be read, not read out loud. These are the central ingredients of socio-ecological climates that differentially impact being and define the uneven exposure to toxicity, violence, and death. That means tracing the current transformations of art too, especially where it escapes the clutches of market-driven institutionalized forms and the mere representation of ecologies, extending into and generating new forms of life, emergent post-carbon futures, and socio-ecological justice. So I wanted to put that there to also put some of the vocabulary that he uses in our mind. Because in our everyday, we're dealing with situations that connect land use, social justice, and inequality, and even if it's not reflected on directly on a daily basis, this makes it particularly important to discuss the future of the art institutions, and maybe also in the light of the current reworking of the ICOM mandate for museums, but this is also a digression. To be able to answer this very urgent call, I want to stay with the trouble, just as is suggested by one of the guardian angels of the exhibition on display, by Donna Haraway. And to do that, I will align myself with Christine Tome, the founding director of Ashkal Alban, the Lebanese Association of Plastic Arts. During Homeworks Forum 7 in 2015, when a double suicide bombing struck in South Beirut on Thursday, 12th of November, As a response to the government, the government declared Friday a day of national mourning, and the education minister ordered all schools and universities in the country to close. Tomé, on the other hand, decided to continue with the program of the Homeworks Forum with an address to all the audiences that gather on that Thursday evening, where she said, and I'm paraphrasing, "If we were to end all our activities and stop all our work whenever something like this happens, we would never get to make culture happen. Our emergencies are and will continue to be different depending on where we are on the planet. However, they all hark back to oppressions that arise from environmental and all the related emergencies. So I want to suggest that we lack a cultural protocol to deal with these emergencies. The failures of globalization, aesthetically, ecologically, financially, culturally, politically, and otherwise, are increasingly impossible to ignore. And the ideas of a future based on ecological thinking is also well rehearsed. However, as has been pointed out in the lead up to this panel, it's really not just about switching to recycled paper. The moral and practical ways to carve out a path for the future that isn't uncomfortable or that materially and seriously change art institutions' behavior are few and far between. We should not be tempted to greenwash our work, but rather face our problems head on, and it will hurt, that much we know. There might be a point in the near or far future where we find that art institutions are no longer needed. However, this does not mean that we cannot continue to find ways to work in a sane and ethical political way within the institutions today. I would like to speculate on how we can create methodologies that will let us continue, albeit with disruption. And I want to focus on the internationalism that has emerged from globalization, the shared knowledge production, the exchange of experiences and expressions. In effect, I suggest to safeguard some of these elements of globalization, and in that process also perhaps develop a new kind of internationalism. I want to bring a specific case to the table and share with you one of the most challenging aspects of that in this regard. So in 2016-17, together with the curator Viviana, who originally is from Australia but based in the Netherlands, I started the production of a gathering of art professionals. We had for a long time discussed the challenges of the freelancer in our field, and being the course director of an MA education in curatorial practice, I knew that I needed to create a larger debate about the working conditions I was about to educate many of my students to subject to. So we decided to convene a large-scale yet cited conversation on the freelancer as a crucial figure in globalization processes. We called it Humans of the Institution, a title that implies both individuals and groups, with the aim to challenge assumptions, habits, and expectations of so-called industry standards in the arts. Our agenda, however, was pragmatic. Humans of the Institution was prompted by a wish to gather and work together towards practical outcomes. This pragmatism emerged from a conviction in the often untapped potential of conference formats as productive gatherings for awareness building, consensus gathering, and in setting agendas for direct action. This untapped potential is one issue that makes this case interesting to speak about today. If we continue to gather without making these gatherings productive in any other way than creating social occasions, or small changes only in the locations of the gathering, we are in fact part of the problem. If we do not share both the content of the gatherings and the results from these gatherings, we continue to create a larger inequality. This is why we worked for both a dissemination of the content via streams and online videos, as well as more considered and reworked outcomes in the form of an online publication. And as a matter of fact, as you know with books, they take time. So in a week or so, it will be online, finally. It only took almost 2 years. Anyways, this is the content page, and you can see the titles of the working groups that we had gathered the day after 2 days of conference, or the gathering. These were the working groups' topics. And it really is just a few weeks away, and you can get it online at the Van Abbe Museum and the university's page. So the notion of conditions on the ground became a watchword used throughout the conversations of Humans of the Institution. This first arose in the program's opening position paper by Rachel O'Reilly and Danny Butt on the topic of boycott as a tactic, based on the events surrounding the 2014 Biennial of Sydney and its sponsorship by Transfield Services. In the conversation that followed, O'Reilly pointed out that the fantasy of non-collective undertakings of the freelance curator is indeed bound by the material weave that make any curatorial project in fact a collective operation. However, the consequences of the collectives are rarely identical to the initial curatorial intention. The most relevant question today is how to be invested in those conditions on the ground, how to be intersubjectively responsible, and how to occupy the antagonism around questions of value, as well as permanently confront curatorial production with itself. And I believe that these questions can also be posed to institutions. With the acknowledgement that the curator in particular, but also the art institution, is in a double bind, many of us act locally but work globally. This is, of course, a privilege that comes with globalization, which also follows the same structures of powers and that replicate inequalities that exist in broader society. Vivian and I did not want to depoliticize this point, but rather infuse the conference with ways to possibly correct some wrongs on a small scale. In other words, we did not only want to address but challenge existing powers. However, we found that the art institution, as a larger field of professionals, lack cultural protocols to do this. We have, of course, seen exhibitions and large-scale projects that deal with both environmental injustice and social violence, but how could we tackle these huge issues in practice with the little means we had? We had to find a way for us, within our means, to be creative in our social engagement. So the larger issue we were facing was, how can we keep global mobility and be socially engaged? As a consequence of this train of thought, an informal international network consisting of organizations, patrons, and funding bodies was created for the purpose of the project, with the aim to garner support for the participation of freelance curators. As a result, a large and broad international attendance was facilitated through the commitment of individuals as well as institutions. We opened up for the participation of delegates that were supported by delegate partners. This was, as you can imagine, built on existing networks, although we did try to make the process as open as possible. The openness resulted in large participation to humans of the institution from Turkey and Scotland, thanks to national funding bodies. And there were, besides this, a few invitations and participations that were intentional and that we worked for quite targeted. For instance, it was important to a Dutch context to make possible participation from Curaçao. And we brokered support from the Frans Hals Museum to support artist and filmmaker Shirley Emanuelsen from Curaçao. We had also been contacted by a young person of color from Britain that wanted to take part but did not have the funds. Thus, we searched in our pool of supporters to see if we could make her participate. Through the generous support of the network Alst in Belgium and their director, Katrien Rijst van Gelden, the participant could join the debate, ensuring a larger British participation. As the critical eye will see, we did indeed replicate a certain power hierarchy, but hopefully we were able to contribute to a tiny redistribution of power still. I see this first attempt to redistribute financial power as the beginning of a cultural protocol within the art institution at large that I hope in the future will challenge existing powers, not only address them. Linking this attempt to ecology, again to the critical eye, will of course make apparent that this did not reduce our sector's carbon footprint, rather it did increase it. However, we did not want to support art tourism with this protocol. We had clear demands to the delegates. They were obliged to take part in our day of closed working groups to contribute to the more permanent outcome of the humans of the institution, which is the publication. We also strongly encouraged the delegates to gather their local art scene upon return, to share with them the key points from the international conversation that seemed the most appropriate to their local contexts. And to wrap up this very short introduction, I would like to sum up with 2 points. So in the process of finding better solution to practical challenges, the fact that carbon emission indeed destroys our environment, we should work to find sustainable cultural protocols to safeguard internationalism and the benefits it has offered our field in our continued commitment to decolonize in the widest sense the contemporary art world. And also to maybe pay attention to this last sentence of the quote that I shared with you in the beginning. Addressing emergencies through direct action, not being afraid of challenging existing powers, can be one way to carve out the future. And the last sentence is, that means tracing the current transformation of art too, especially where it escapes the clutches of market-driven institutionalized form and the mere representation of ecologies, extending into and generating new forms of life, emergent post-carbon futures, and socio-ecological justice. And for those that have been able to pay attention to this quote, I'm likening art with also the art institution. So, thank you.
Should I just go for it?
So thank you, Anne. So the basic question seems to arrive with your proposal, that is the imagination, which I guess we are lacking in facing the environmental crisis, and I think we'll get to this after, how art can help us to develop these new forms of life. And now I would like to ask Viviana to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's interesting because we didn't prepare this before, but I think our contributions are quite on the same line. I would like to put a timer for myself, because if not, I can speak forever. And so it's quite interesting because, in a nutshell, I would say that we are trying to invite people to think about our own environment. So instead of relocating the environment somewhere else, it's the environment of the arts. Did I get you right? So that is pretty similar to what I'm going to suggest as well. I would like to use this moment to thank everybody that was involved in the organization of the flights, the accommodation, the food, the hospitality, the care. It was absolutely fantastic. And this encounter wouldn't exist if it was not for the person that is indicated over there. I will try the best pronunciation I can in Polish, which is Magdalena Ziółkowska. I'm sure it's not correct, but that's me. Here it goes. By the way, my surname is Checchia, so we are 1-1 now. It's fine. So, as you can see from... yes. So underneath my name, there is the role that I actually cover for my institution, which is Public Engagement Curator. And when we started the conversation with the group on email, Jarosław sent us this question, which I found quite intriguing, about if it is possible that in order to figure out a different solution for the environmental crisis and for a better connection with the climate change and social justice and all the different topics that are emerging within the institutions, engagement can be the answer. Am I speaking too fast? Yes, sorry, I'll decrease. So, the interesting thing is that when I accepted the job that I'm doing at the moment, I had no idea about the power of the word engagement. And it's actually a very strange one. So I would like to prove my argument by just making a short counting in the room. So we have 3 technicians, then we have 2 translators, another person there that I think is taking care of these machines, and 22 people in the audience, plus the panel. How many of you would actually label his own self as artist? Can you raise your hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. Can you keep the number? Because the maths needs to... How many of you would actually describe himself as curator? No. Just them. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 15 people, we are 22. So would the rest of them describe themselves as an art practitioner? Can you raise your hands, please? 2. Okay, anybody is a collector in the room? Collector? Gallerist? No? General public. General public 1, 2, 3, great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 general public. Did you raise your hands twice? No, good. The maths are not coming, I mean, there is something wrong, but it's fine. It's still part of what we should interrogate, which is, in total, we have 4 people from the general public. So, and this is how we engage. Generally what happened, that if you try to question the same thing for the opening of an exhibition or for a workshop with kids, teenagers, families, and you do the same exercise, the percentages of the demographic wouldn't really appear in the same way. So what we should really question is the ecology that we created around the products that we are sharing between ourselves, the general public, and within the art system. Does that make sense so far? So that's my question. So is it the engagement part just something to tick boxes and to say, okay, we have done our social duty and we are connecting a broader society because art is here and reality is here, and so we need to rebalance? Or it is actually like an integral part of what the institution does. So if the mere task of engaging with broader society correspond to the public engagement officer, the public engagement curator, the curator of engagement, whatever you want to call it, there is something that doesn't work that right, because it means that somehow that position is allowing freedom for the rest of the beautiful stuff that are for us and us only to exist. So we are creating something like the program that I do, which is mainly for general public. Public engagement curator does the public engagement program. But then the reality is that this allows the rest of the institution of doing the freedom of doing aesthetic stuff and having our talks and reconsidering our position all the time and investing a lot in on ourselves. I don't know if that economy is that sustainable. So this is one of the things that we should already consider, because if after so many years of public art and participatory art and community art and socially engaged art practice, we are still at this point on a Friday afternoon in Warsaw, there is something that is not quite convincing. And this is not just CCA Warsaw problem. I mean, can anybody actually demonstrate the contrary in one of your institution or collective or organization? Does that happen? No, don't be shy. So that's the point. So I would like to start from that, and that is my first reaction to this idea of engagement. I really believe that an engaged institution can be the solution if the whole institution is engaging. It can't be just a department. It can't be that the things that happen for us are from the main door and the things that are happening for the families are in the educational department somewhere else, disconnected in the lateral door. Again, I'm not trying here to do the institutional critique of this institution. I don't know this institution. I'm trying to generalize. And this is what I witness most of the time whenever I'm invited as public engagement curator. But there were other points that were mentioned during our email exchange. And one of the things that Jarosław was questioning is about his ecology of care. So, and how is that maybe we can create a better ecology of care within the art system and within the institution? So I would say that this is another thing that we should question. I don't know what is the case in Poland and in Warsaw, but in Scotland we are witnessing a raising of mental health issues within the art sector. More and more people are getting panic attacks and they are very anxious, and basically all our life, the trajectory of our life as practitioners becomes something that for some reason we can't really deal with. And also this is quite problematic. And I don't think that is just the result of climate change. It's more the fact that we are talking about issues, but we are not relating these issues to us, to ourselves. So after so many years, the trajectory we are trying to engender within our institution is still the trajectory of the solo show. So if an artist is going to do a workshop within the public engagement program, it's not as good as the artist being presented in the galleries, isn't it? Why? Why it is sort of maniac attack about protagonism? How is that we are still supporting it, but then claiming that we are trying to decolonize? We want something against macho culture. It has to be diverse. I don't think it's that diverse. It's actually pretty much the same sort of strategies and dynamics all year round, all the time, creating anxiety in artists because if they don't have enough residencies, if they don't have enough shows, they cannot really survive in a positive way within the system. And also this takes us to another question, which is the residencies right now, and I was questioning this the other day with one of the current residencies here at CCA, Carolina here in the room, they are an alternative economy for artists, because artists are a very vulnerable part of the system still, and they can gain money out of the participation of these residencies. But try to imagine, guys, if we can't fly anymore, how are we going to be part of these residencies? So these are the sort of questions that we need to pose to ourselves about how is that we really live in this current ecosystem. So how is that we can cope with the level of resources and money and energy that we all need in order to do what we need to do without having a broader impact on the planet, trying to survive with what already exists. So I should say also that I shared the questions with the director of the CCA, he's called Francis McKee, because I felt the urgency of sharing this with the team and trying to understand if some of my opinions, as you can see, they are quite extreme, could be also, let's say, accepted by the rest of the team and how they would react. And one of the things that Francis suggested is that this idea of care is actually double-edged, because it means that we are starting to care, but someone else is not caring. So it means, again, that we are trying to fill the gap of what the government should do, the council should do, or other organizations that probably are better equipped to sort out things that we are now trying to sort out within the art system. The other question was about the role of the institution in the future. So the first thing that I would like to say is that I would recommend everybody to read this book. I didn't edit it, I didn't publish it, it's not for personal reasons, but I think it's really important. Marc Auger is questioning the value that we are giving to the future, as if, again, in the same way that the environment is over there and we are here, the future is over there and we are here. But we are already living the future. Whatever we are doing now is having an impact on whatever will come. So if instead of just trying to create this sort of scenario that is entirely disconnected from us, we try to bring the scenario in and to understand how is that we are operating, this can be much more beneficial. So thinking about the present as the future. So within the question about how is that the institutions can help, I would still say, and in this I agree with Francis, that the institutions can really help to reimagine this present future, to be a catalyst for this present future, and also to show different forms of living, different forms of cohabiting, and trying to be really like informative also in this way, stimulating for the audiences, ourselves, other sectors, because we have creative approaches that can help sorting out questions that are very urgent for the planet, for sure. It's just that instead of creating satellites of this question, we should integrate it in the way in which we are already operating. So to the question, what are the forms in which we can do that? I would say, so first of all, it would be really important to reflect on what is that we are doing, give us some time and slowness. I understand from the visit during these days that CCA is already doing that, like having a slow pace engaging with projects for years, trying to understand through conversation how you can work with practitioners from all over the world. And that's, for me, already like a good form in order to be more sustainable. Because at the end of the day, that's the point. How is that with what we do, we can be already more sustainable? And also this idea of connecting with the locale, so using the local knowledge and using the local side. So with this, I just answered to the questions, because I'm a bit like that. If you give me topics and tasks, I just try to follow them. But I would like now to relate it to the CCA as well, so that you can have an idea of the ecosystem of the CCA in Glasgow. So the CCA went through a period of almost bankruptcy in 2006, and then in 2007, the current director, Francis McKee, created a model that we call the open source. What it means is that basically, since we didn't have enough money to program our activities within the spaces of the CCA, we started to repurpose the spaces. So this, for instance, is the theater space, and it is open for anybody to program. So the open source is based on the fact that anybody can use the spaces for free. They can program their activities, and they can even have some profit from it. They can add the tickets to the invitation to this event. So the only parameter to use the space for free is that it needs to be a public event, and it is to be somehow connected to the ecosystem of whoever is programming it. So the person that is programming it needs to be in need of this space. So if it is a private, super rich possible sponsor, they would hire the venue. But if it is an artist or a collective or young organizations, they can have it for free. By doing that, it means that we produce around 1,500 events per year. We have around 250 partners. So these spaces are used by artists, curators, but also the Red Cross, or charities, or festivals for social justice, or festival connected with gender issues. So it means that within the building of the CCA, we have a constant different crowd that is coming in and attending different events. But again, I would question, is that sustainable? Like, we are reaching everybody, and it is sustainable in the sense that we are not imagining that Magdalena is a very big fan of rock music, and I'm going to make a full month of rock music, because we are only basically giving the opportunity to whoever is already producing something to come and say, I have my network, I know that this is actually of interest for a specific demographic in Glasgow, I'm going to offer this event at the CCA. So it means that somehow we are not envisioning what is that the audiences would like to see, but we are leaving the audiences program the space. By doing that, we are also decreasing the curatorial power, because it means that it is not all about us having a vision, having this sort of curatorial and programmatic understanding of what needs to be showed and what needs to be presented, because the people would do it. And so what is part of CCA gets determined by the urgencies that are really in town. So I would describe it as a sort of a civic approach, is really connected with what the city is suggesting to us. So in that sense, it's sustainable, but 1,500 events is a lot. So it's a lot of labor, a lot of energy also from our team, and lots of people that are going through the building, and I'm not sure that that is really what we should do when we speak about the creation of a more sustainable ecosystem. As you can see, I'm playing the devil advocates with all of you, with myself, because this is the idea. The first thing is we should question ourselves rather than question something that is the unknown, that is not here and not in the room. As a result also of this approach, which I believe is really interesting, is hyper-democratic, everybody is participating, I started to implement what we call open source with an open model what we called open source model with an open source approach. So as a curator myself, I started to abandon the building, and I'm trying to support activities that already exist in town. But instead of being activities related to the CCA as the environment, they are related to cafes, bistros, other cafes, multicultural community center, community garden, and one of the center for the inclusion of refugees. Why is that? Because these people are already doing plenty of cultural activities, but most of the time they are not elevated or accepted as culture. But what it is culture? Culture means making sense to life, making sense to society, making sense to the now, what is that we are living now. So there is nothing better than actually trying to be ecological, but trying to support what already exists, nurture what already exists, implementing it in a creative way, and trying to give them support in any possible. It is, most of the time is not financial. We are a very poor organization. It's more know-how, expertise, emotional support, empathic support that comes from the CCA to these groups and vice versa. So by doing that, we are really trying to create a sustainable ecosystem in which we don't try to duplicate activities and interests. We try to respect the knowledge that is present in the locale, because it is as valid as the knowledge that we can see globally and coming from everywhere else. We also invite international artists, but it is really trying to rebalance also what is local and global means, and starting really from the roots. So I think that I'm advocating here for three things that could help for this institutional ecology: a civic practice, a sustainable practice, and an ethical practice. And I think that I'm just in time. 13 seconds left. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Viviana, for putting the question of ecology into the very heart of the institution. Now I ask Mira to share with us with your reflection.
I just wanted to ask some which images, or it's not an option. So maybe I should say share. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I want to express my thanks to Jarosław also, and Małgorzata and Magdalena. Yes, for this great opportunity to present and to be present on this important event here in Warsaw. So many congrats also on your chosen approach for this important topic. So your direction and thoughts on the subject were really inspiring and stimulated us as Museum of Contemporary Art in Skopje to ask ourselves again, what is our role and challenge towards the big subject of climate change? In what way it changes us as an institution, and in general, should we feel invited to engage in the wide, narrow or open debate? It is not difficult to answer these questions, because if we look upon our specific programs, we see that both the world of artists and those who follow contemporary art feel that this subject is extremely important, or to say, epochal. So the alert is already elevated, and we as part of the art community and are even urged to engage in a process of radical change for a new way of managing ourselves and our environment. Art institutions, art communities, as influential agents, are publicly invited to take its responsible role and actively participate in the search of new institutional response for the future and recognize the limits of the present. So let's try to see from closer one of most evident challenges we as social institutions are facing. On a global level, at first, climate change was discussed as a distant problem, something to fix for future generations. Then it was discussed as geographically remote, distant, something that was happening in some other part of the world. Institutions have difficulties addressing problems that lie in the future or extend beyond national boundaries. I would like to elaborate further on the problem of distance, on the problem of disconnection. We're disconnected for our audiences because we live actually in post-truth politics. So these post-truth politics are characterized by a political culture in which public opinion and media narrative have become almost entirely disconnected from the policy, the substance of legislation. Disconnected from policy means disconnected from the institution. So these disconnections created in my country bizarre results. Yes, I will show you now. I don't know how to make this picture bigger. Yes. Maybe you should just, or this one, so I will go further. This one? Yes. Yes, can I go? Okay. Okay. Yes, this is one example. Well, this is the project known as Skopje 2014 project. And this project accounted for 1/3 of the national budget, 1 billion euros, through the announcement of a simple and naive premise to make the city more beautiful. This spurred several protest movements, most notably the Colorful Revolution. Because there is no chance to move these images, I will continue. Project Skopje 2014 and rebellious acts in the arts and protest movements in response to it can serve as a case study for an examination of the potential and limitations of the art practices, actually. The project started 2009 when the government announced plans for the large-scale development of the city center, including a complex of buildings and monuments built in inappropriate public spaces, lacking both a consultation of professional opinion and a broader examination of the subject of urbanity or civic involvement. In the government's nationalistic censoring of the past, it replaced the modernist facades of buildings with Baroque and neoclassical designs, obsolete historical styles that never existed in the history of architecture in Macedonia, now North Macedonia. The project itself reflects the nationalistic authoritarian regime, populism, and the hegemony of the ruling party. Art was used as a tool for political purposes. The Museum of Contemporary Art was neglected in the process, and its functions was completely diminished. Its educational program was reduced, limited, and retrograde. Audience that forwards event of culture and art was small and recently highly passive and indifferent to the pressure of everyday life. But even though this dissatisfaction, especially among among intellectuals had been rising, most people actually approved and even liked the project. So thanks to the entertaining appearance of their images on social media, the initial rebellious movement in Skopje escalated onto the mass protest called the Colorful Revolution. It mobilized thousands of people who expressed their anger by throwing paint over the monuments, which were perceived as symbols of the government's oppression and hegemony. The Colorful Revolution did not dissolve important obstacles. It did not possess the strength for the mass mobilization of different segments of society, a key condition for significant political change. The Colorful Revolution failed to avoid being an elitist movement. So why are the Balkans so specific, so bizarre? The reason is that this part of Europe was faced in the last decades with a specific challenge. Society in the Balkans is in the process of a complex transition, never-ending transition, different from the other parts of Eastern Europe. So this transition from totalitarian socialism to market capitalism was additionally complicated with the need to create a new, smaller state, and to change its economic strategy and tactics to accommodate to a local war situation. But what is especially a handicap for these countries is the disconnection, exclusion from the European institutions. This absence, this distance, has consequences, and the consequences that the capitalism, more easily managed to profit from the lack of an accepted value system in this region. It seems we, art institutions as social institutions, should claim ownership in the field of information and in the field of research and knowledge, distribution of knowledge. If we agree that we have problem to reach the public opinion, it seems that we could identify our focus today on creating trusted channels of communication to compete with the world of fake news. So here, however, we are facing some dilemmas because certain theoreticians are considering that the practice of art is emancipated and emancipating only when it renounces the authority of the imposed messages, the target audience, or when, in other words, it stops wanting to emancipating us. So we have a narrow terrain to find a way to be at the same time authoritative and to avoid becoming authoritarian, hegemonic. Therefore, I think it is not an exaggeration if we keep the issue of social change, of the future of social relations, open and current, in parallel with the issue of climate change. Probably these social changes, if we are to say the forecasts will be slow, as the general awareness of climate change and social change that is already underway is far from being as accepted and recognized as a threat. Zizek is probably right. We are in the early stages of a period of grief for the question of climate change. It will take us a time for the rage to reach the acceptance. In any case, the centers of contemporary art, museums of contemporary art, should avoid being an integral part of pseudo-activity, one of the many raiding actions that repeat short, convincing messages. If we need to preserve something worthwhile, is the integrity of our institutions. Through them, as a collective, we are approaching possible joint action, new models of the social for the future. And climate change, though previously unimaginable problem maybe, does not actually require a radical departure from traditional struggles for freedom, justice, and equality. It simply possesses new versions of familiar dilemmas. There is a basic need to create horizontal solidarity structures in our society without a broader social change agenda, the environmental and climate justice movements cannot achieve any success. So let me come back to the initial question, whether an art institution is an institution of ecology, of care. Ecology is literally meaning sense of home, and I have recognized art and art institutions as important in the context of the conservation of the planet as our home, and care is especially our business. And what the institution of contemporary art can provide is an experience of nurturing, caring for the object and subject. The institution of care has been recognized through the role of the curator. So what the art community can offer is double experience, the care of its objects and the protection for all humanity, encompassing also the marginalized and the oppressed. To face the obvious difficulties in a situation where we cannot formulate the problem, all efforts are welcomed, and one major threat that we must recognize and confront is the fake news, since they pollute the information space and sabotage scientific actions. And in that respect, we need to provide more room for scientifically verified truths, treating the fields of ignorance, because the complexity of the problem most likely concerns us as the centers through the object and most certainly as subjects. Contemporary art centers are institutions active in the field of visual and should profit being in the position to choose the angle, to offer it vitrines. And at the end, let me conclude with the following. We are witnessing radical change in the climate and radical change in the social climate. At social level, we are witnessing global warming in the complex political relationship along the lines of deep divisions. I have also tried to argue that we are witnessing serious pollution in the field of information and distribution of knowledge. So our institutions as art institutions, embodying the beliefs, fears, and desires of the epoch, are regarded as an institutions with authority. To prove contemporaneity, we are an institution advocating the need to address in a different way new challenges. In doing so, proving our contemporaneity through action. We should be central to the peripheries of our influence, so we should equip ourselves to comprehend the real needs of the momentum. The global challenge needs collective response. Collaboration of art institutions from different geographical areas could improve both our knowledge and our capacity to be an active agent who could influence its environmental, to have, in Malabou's words, a desired plastic form as a result of our action in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira, for bringing the issue that actually the environmental crisis is basically a social crisis. So we need to have social response for this. Now I would like to ask Defne for continuing.
When I think of sustainable projects that I've personally done, like really sustainable, which was done not because I was environmentally conscious, but because it was done, there was no budget. So the most sustainable projects turned out to be the less money projects and the more interesting projects. Now that I look at it through the filter of the discussion today, one was the Baltic Triennial. The whole exhibition was pushed through one human body. So there was no white cube use, but the body became the site through which the whole biennial was pushed. So as a vessel. And the second project I've done was the Moscow Biennial, which was no crating, no shipment, no insurance whatsoever, no wall construction. It was a 10-day of
programming that happened in one space that looked at ways how to gather and how to build together. So if I look back, that also happened because that solution came because there was no money. But that said, environmental consciousness, yes. My father was the founder of the Green Party in Turkey, and he tried to turn me into Greta of Turkey when I was 8, 9 years old. So I had a lot of pictures of me in some Joseph Beuys, Action Jackson protests on the side of Bosphorus. So I don't know what it did to my consciousness. But currently I'm in front of you as the artistic director of the Gwangju Biennale, which is asking for a mega exhibition, which is not necessarily, so I might be engaging in some long-term criminal activity as a result. And I was also the director of Witte de With Center for Contemporary Art, where it's a publicly funded institution, and where my job was to create both a curatorial and a strategic vision extended to a larger imaginary for publics yet to come, so, and raise all the money that was required to make it happen. So I believe institutions are really a productive expression of their time, their immediate reality and their variables, including schisms as such. They can distinguish themselves with intrepid commentary on our shared and cultural and political predicament, through bold programs, and these endeavors can always aim at understanding the development of vital contemporary issues, and more importantly, to play an active role in their continual evolution. On that note, congratulations to CCA, to Jarosław and Gorzka and Magdalena for your programming here. The exhibition is wonderful, and you're definitely adding to that discussion, which is so timely. What I did in my part at Witte de With was really test sustainable ways of operating as an art institution, physically but also aesthetically, and also spiritually, if I may to say that, how to create first and foremost a spirit for a place, while programming space and spaces, but also time, how to transform the refrigerator, white cube, into a kitchen, into a campfire for songs. So we started doing that by not only focusing on the outer consumption of art, but also its inner creation, by turning the spotlight on transactions of art, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and acts of making art visible, audible, literary, relevant, and reciprocal through sustained dialogues, by offering spaces of generosity and concentration, by deep, longer-term intellectual care, by not calling for grand cultural paradigms and exoticized economies of difference, but by asking for decency, nuanced sensibilities, and synchronicities, by accelerating encounters, non-heroic gestures with the same zeal. And doing all this while not compromising to one's own aspirations for a just society, while resisting hard not to budge in to the new game board in formation in front of us. We're working very hard against austerity measures, and the tides, as we know, are hollowing out something fundamental in our society by reclaiming the spaces that were on the verge of taking a hit, such as humanities, theater, and academia. This is something I'm feeling also is very much in the air in Poland, but it's only my second day, so excuse me if I'm generalizing. Crisis is also what sustains, what creates desire and focus after all. But the truth is, times as we've come to know them are over. Political changes are spurring the globe, are explosions of democracy and its institutions. And this landscape of lost narrative continuously recycles various decades at different speeds, pulling them to different corners at the same time, as globalization scholar Akbar Abbas describes the notion of volatility, making it hard for us mortals to have the imagination of, or clarity for that matter. What do I do now that the roof has blown off? When the country I used to belong to, Turkey, is no more, when the intellectual frameworks I operate within are vanishing, what happens when the reality on the ground changes? A drastic change is happening indeed, as artist Goshka Masuga is addressed in her show, in collaboration with Ahmet Öğüt, in their show, The Show Is Over, which was 2 years ago, where they took up the notion of destruction and sudden change,
and invoke them to challenge the perceived stability of art and institutions through its transformative processes of shattering, hijacking, eclipsing, undoing, merging, destroying, and recontextualization. Matsuga created an illusion, a meta layer in the show that something had taken place from one day to the other, or something unexplainable and sudden that happened to the work, to the institution, or to us. This was intended to reflect on the political conditions people, artists, or institutions may find themselves in. Abrupt changes in circumstance, new worlds, states of shock, and inability to understand the motives of those in charge, and immersion in another language. None of us could have guessed, wished, or foreseen how prescient this idea would be. Can destruction be seen as a means of engaging with the present socio-political landscape, to critique, to protest, or to confront the predicament? Maloby finds destruction quite fertile, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong. Or in other words, to take a further leap of faith, can we truly break out of the frame? Don't we want to, or we simply can't? We seem to think that we can make it all work if we continue our good ethical work, as if expanded curatorial practices, as most of us have been working as a goal here in this panel and in the audience, meaning towards inclusion of the others, of the margins, of the unwritten histories, will do it. If major omissions are fixed, justice can be restored, and this way the world as we know it can be won back. For my part, I'm convinced that there is no going back. Perhaps there is nowhere to go back to. I mean literally and metaphorically. As long as we frame our inquiries only within Guerrilla Girls' metrics of inclusion, which all of us here, I would hope, would fare high and solid in terms of our fieldwork, I'm afraid we will remain surprised, blinded, just pick your poison. Also, we with vastly different pursuits will each find out today, if not already yesterday, or soon tomorrow, that we are part of the problem. Any act of denial will collapse. We'll all move and operate in our 50 shades of complicity. There are also the times that any genuine effort from an institution can also be perceived as a form of repression. Any executive willingness or an attempt embeds in itself or disguises a matrix of power and adherence to the status quo after all, and results, intentionally or unintentionally, in other forms of silencings and reactions, top-down, bottom-up, horizontal, vertical. No doubt that institutions must catch on the momentum of activisms and growing calls for justice that have taken the world by storm. We must imagine from anew if we cannot fix the current Frankensteins that we managed to create. Neither institutions nor we as curators or directors cannot stay neutral. Institutions are still sites for unnamed resistances where we can come together with artists divining on our presence and immediate futures against tides that are towards homogenization. Only when we acknowledge our responsibilities to address the issues raised by artists and activists, we can be trusted collaborators. But we're also compromised, of course, being at the nexus of this and that power structures. We have to take the time to look within collectively and individually and understand exactly how we've been part of the problem. As invented frameworks and linguistic deliriums can no longer help us, and that only stories rooted in demonstrable personal experience have validity, believe me, we must come to recognize this, that should be essential and core to our programs. Internal institutional processes can be painful, rife with open-ended questions. Not knowing quite what the final destination will be can be nerve-wracking, which is half of the reason why we should embark on them anyway, onto the unknown. Given the intensity of the nationwide responses that came about my announcement to the need to make a change to the need of Witte de Wit 2 years ago, due to its colonial connotations, I can attest that only when we as institutions take such a leap, we're able to prod the cornerstones that are taken as a given in a society. As we were able to broaden our audiences over the past several years, while I was there, I'm not there anymore, also engaging publics that had never been part of Witte de Wit's past, I'm of course curious to know what will ensue with my successor now, what will unfold as a reaction for our plea for a more just society, for for a more fair take on our shared predicament. In our experience, art, in this case of artist Wendelin von Oldenburg, played a role in solidarity with anti-racist movements, because we also stepped up to owning up to our raison d'être, which is dialogue, and to our complex societal context at the nexus of power, society, and various hierarchical relations. The artist was no stranger to our institution, she was a local, but now we thought it was an opportune moment to invite her, since she had the momentum as the representative of the National Pavilion in the Venice Biennial, and energy she brought back to Rotterdam, where the institution is based. This heightened visibility made it all possible to confront issues of representation and raise the public's attention to them with maximum national impact. The issue of change to the name became a national election item. The platform, however, at its outset revealed that we, as the host, are potentially part of the problem. From our first preparatory meeting, we were prompted by the programmers and participants to the blind spot of the institutional history and self-awareness. We were challenged to reconsider the legacies of the name of the institution. The question was posed by the platform's programmers during the preparations of the project, and later through an open letter addressed to the institution. What does it mean for a white institution to do critical work under the moniker of Witte de Wit? This was the first time the institution has been challenged deeply about its colonial implications because of its name. Attention has been drawn to the operating under such a name in the field of contemporary art practice that claims criticality. So it's the colonial admiral that was quite violent in its past hundreds of years ago. So the process of considering the implications of the institution's name has been challenging, replete with questions, ongoing self-reflection, and critical re-evaluation within the team, the Dutch team. I was a Turk running the institution, and our board. This is a process that we've come to recognize as core to the hosting of the project as well. As spaces for humanities debate and overall questioning, as politics and media pulverize in front of our eyes, we've come to become a site and vessel for nationwide debate about sanitized histories. But whether this debate feeds also the wrong political forces, the alt-right, and leads to further fragmentation, that's a big question. The hardest question that we received in the open call that I was unable to address, and I think it was kind of blanketed, was also white art institutions, whether they carry the name of a colonizer or not, are excited to engage with feminist, queer, black, intersectional, and decolonial perspectives, as long as these critical interventions are framed as discourses and stripped of their radical potential and praxis. What does it mean then when a white institution welcomes and assimilates people of color or with intersectional interests into its structures? This is a question that I'm also bringing up to you, because this is something you mentioned also, how to escape the institutional forms. What are the escape places for art? That is. As it's clear, nothing can be done alone, but together. After all, this is our shared histories, shared violences and transgressions, as well as our shared predicament. We're preparing for fires and floods and refugees. This impending catastrophe heightens the urgency for almost any world-improving action. In times of increasing chaos, people seek protection in fascism, silence, forms of nationalism, tribalism, and armed force, rather than in the rule of law. And our best defense against this kind of dystopia is to maintain the work, perhaps not, on the improvement of legal systems, functioning communities. In this respect, any movement towards a more just and civil society should still be considered a meaningful climate action. Sure, we will continue to work with some of the most challenging artists of our times, develop new questions and positions with and through us, with their abilities to imagine the world otherwise, to system break, channel the transformative energies of the world, their visions as alternative. I also hope that we can let their practices influence and transform our institutions within as well, spark our evolutions within, and also who we are ourselves. To the extent we can approximate and internalize our own programs, to the extent we offer ourselves to destruction, I really believe we can find the indestructible in us, what is plastic, in our essence. So although criticized this week, if you follow the Fransen's article in New Yorker, he wrote, securing fair elections is a climate action. Combating extreme wealth inequality is a climate action. Shutting down the hate machines on social media is climate action. Instituting humane immigration policy, advocating for racial and gender equality, promoting respect for laws and their enforcement, supporting a free and independent press, ridding the country of assault weapons, these are all meaningful climate actions. To survive the rising temperatures, every system, whether of the natural world or of the human world, will need to be as strong and healthy as we can make it. As for Gwangju, it is exactly these vocabularies and diverse practices my colleague Natasha Ginwala and I are looking at, and how they contend with the future horizon of cognitive capitalism and planetary imperialisms, as well as the present dimension of neural networks and other techno-spiritual emergences that populate our computational biosphere. In challenging the structural divisions placed between corporal, technological, and spiritual intelligence, we will inquire into a broad set of cosmologies, activating planetary life systems and modes of communal survival to kind of figure out the idea of a communal mind. And on that note, we're also looking at ways to creating solidarity networks across the world, because I personally believe that now that we're falling on the same side, all of us, whether it's Poland or America, like finally our British friends are talking politics. So it's not only the Turks and the Macedonians and the Lebanese are talking politics. We're all falling on the same side globally. So there is definitely a potential to create a network for a more global communion and reaching out towards a communal mind.
Thank you very much. I think that the question of care rises as a main issue here, both internal in terms of how to care about our institution, particular ones, and through these about the broader environment. But maybe I would like to address the audience if you would like to join at the moment, before to comment, to add something, or to disagree or agree.
Hi, I have a question to you, because you emphasize so much the present and, yes, the present and the future. So as an artist, a practitioner, I very much believe that there is the past as something very important. And what I found, we always have to include it, because what is happening all the time is we follow in amnesia. I live in Berlin, 27 years. And when I moved there, like 93, you know, the marks of the traces were very obvious in Berlin. So I'm 27 years now there, and I see again a repetition. And my question to you is like, how can we cure amnesia? Because unlearning, because I think the problem is unlearning, the problem is like forgetting. So we repeat, you know, like a criminal. So we forget something. So I think if we start from present and go to future, you know, again, we repeat mistakes. So I think it's very necessary to think how we can cure amnesia. How can we stop repeating the same tactics? I have the feeling, as one of you said, now I don't remember, that we repeat. I think you said that. I mean, who's going to the museum? Who's going to institutions? You know, and you make this gallop, let's say, the statistics. So how can we cure this? How can we change this? So this is my...
Sure. So first of all, like, your concern comes from the idea that repetition is by default a bad thing. But repetition is not by default a bad thing, in my opinion. So it just depends how is that we repeat, but we can repeat. And actually there is something beautiful about repeating other than being obsessive about the creation of the new. So even within, for instance, the connection with the Malibu text, this idea of the new forms and the regenerating forms is not new forms as if they are entirely brand new and non-connected with the past, but something that can constantly regenerate from something that is in the past and it exists. So I think that repetition and amnesia are not entirely connected in what you are suggesting. So we should cure our amnesia. There shouldn't be amnesia, but the cure is not to repeat, because we could repeat and repeat better. But within this, there is also a conception of time, because what you have mentioned, so far we are talking about a linear time, past, present, future. And now you are thinking of a sort of a circular time that is repeating. Now, an Italian...
I didn't mean to repeat everything. I just think it's like, how can we, these precise ideas, how can we cure this? I mean, if you see, like we had again, like even in Berlin, when it was the first time Cosmopolitan, we have the same ideas, about the homosexuality, about the equality. There were themes that were discussed very much in the city, that they are discussed again. So that's what I mean. It's like, how can we, this particular part, how can we cure? Not the repetition. We are repetitive, we are mimetics and repetitive. We learn through repetition for sure. But only this, that's what I'm saying, and of course, I don't want to consider guiltness a part of curing this.
So, like, I don't know if I have the answer, but from an Italian perspective, I'm pretty much in love with what Leopardi used to say. Leopardi was an Italian writer, poet, but also had a philosophical approach to life, and he wrote a book, probably quite boring, but with some interesting concept, called Zibaldone. And in Zibaldone, he explains that we have this sort of regular, pattern. So it's like a parabolic pattern in which things are emerging, repeating, disappearing, re-emerging again. I intentionally go back in time in understanding what are the nuances that were lost in order to understand how is that I can recuperate and refuse the concept of novelty. Not because I don't have ideas. I have ideas, but I still think that I intentionally want to go back into that amnesia and think, how is that we forgot about the struggle that we already went through? I don't know if I remember it well, but there was a project that is to fall again, and fall better. And I would entirely associate to...
This project has a name, it's called Communism, and the author who said what you just said was Rosa Luxemburg, one of the main protagonists. And as I have the mic, can I ask another question, or we wanted to continue? Okay, so thank you very much. I mean, actually, I'm very happy to be here and to listen to all these presentations, also because this topic of ecology, sustainability, and interrelations between art institutions and climate catastrophe, I would say, even. It's interesting. It's also quite difficult to put together, I think. And I was thinking, when you were talking, I was thinking of different projects, because I didn't lie, but as an art theorist, I didn't fit into any of the boxes that you. So I'm not exact. I mean, I'm also a general public, but also there is another version of being a usual suspect of this institution, which is art theory. So anyhow, so I was thinking of this. I don't know what the translation is for rabunkowa gospodarka na człowieku, because we speak of rabunkowa gospodarka na środowisku. So if somebody has a good translation, so plunder economy on ecology, we usually say, but I use this expression of plunder economy on a human organism very often to describe the work conditions in which I'm working. So usually it's academia or art projects. And it's always, I mean, when some of you were thinking whether you ever participated in sustainable projects, I realized that probably my life experience, and I'm 41 years old, and I've been working since I was 14, more or less. So I believe I maybe never had a project that I would depict as sustainable. So that's already, so on one hand, you might start crying already. We spoke about crying. But on the other hand, so it's kind of a painful coming out, if I may say. Yeah. So I'm feeling a lot of pain while saying it even publicly, because I'm a bit ashamed, perhaps I'm stupid and I didn't choose my jobs, well, or shit like that. But perhaps it's also a characteristic of the economy we are living in. So therefore, this, the fact that many of you, I think all of you maybe, mentioned gender issues, and the and so feminism as a strategy or element of what you are doing, or of how you imagine the work of the institution is actually quite important. So I'm thinking that perhaps the art institution, perhaps a very short answer to how to have this sustainable ecological art institution is basically to avoid this plundering economy on a human organism or something like that. So I'm not sure if I'm asking a question right now, but maybe my question would be whether you want to share whether you ever worked in a sustainable project, because you mentioned Defne, I think, but perhaps, yeah, perhaps this is a question, like whether we actually do have a chance to work in it, and whether raising this issue that perhaps none of them is actually really sustainable, maybe even saying it is already a critical sort of, a critical intervention. Thank you again for...
Can you explain plundering human organism?
Yeah, plundering, because when you describe an investment, for instance, which is very dangerous for ecology of the region in which this investment takes place, in Polish you say rabunkowa gospodarka na środowisku, and in in English you would say, maybe the translators have an... I say it to you because we're not on. But we can't hear them, so...
Okay. We can't hear him, okay. Exploitation.
So over-exploitative economy on the organism. Yeah. So this is what I mean. So over-exploitation, basically. Yeah.
In the political and economical system, that's a very common thing, and well, this is what it is. We don't know no other.
So just on the same note, I believe that perhaps we don't have this kind of experience of being, sustainable. Perhaps that just doesn't happen, which puts under question and which demands to call ideology any suspicions that that somewhere there is this happy Disneyland with sustainable projects, or. I mean, and I didn't mean Scandinavia or anything.
In terms of what I want to respond to one part, if I understand it correctly, I don't know, but the exploitation aspect. When I changed this very refrigerator institution at Witte de Wit and created a bit of a spirit, and Joanna, correct me if you don't agree with that, but there was definitely energy to the place, is when I saw in this open call, this was... I took the bullet for every institution. It wasn't like personally me, or it was just the project just instigated this, and the open call saying all art institutions are exploiting feminism, queer theories, blackness. They are shredding and processing and removing their radicality away. Like, that's like the ultimate critique. I mean, obviously every institution is compromised because of this. You were talking how in England, Scotland, tick boxes, you have to do this and you have to do this, you have to do that. But that's like such a hard question. I mean, it's like, and that's why what you say, how art can escape institutional forms. I mean, in the quote of Temos, there's that institutional, like art escaping institutional exploitation, because there's 50 shades of exploitation, right? Like, there's good exploitation, there's mutual beneficial fauna, mutual exploit. I mean, there's multiple levels of, but at the end of the day, this is the nature of the beast. You were saying something, sir.
Well, one of the things that you said is how we're gonna do what we need to do. And the idea of flying, for example, like my question is, do we really need to do? And isn't that what got us here? And answering your question, and forgive me for being vague, but sustainability in capitalism is a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful concept, but I would say it's only in words.
No, I would be happy to, because it seems like you wanted to maybe...
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to this. There are random comments to this that also links into what Defne was pointing at. But I think that yes, I think I can't really think of any project that has been sustainable that I've ever worked in. Oh, you know, I think that many of us share that, and many of us feel that. It might not be that I might have had a job that gave me, you know, a living wage, but I might have felt that I was exploited. Although I could survive, like my physical being could survive, but anyway, that's just a kind of a note of support, I guess, but also of acknowledging that there are many different ways of being exploited. It's not only financial. But I wanted to, I can't remember what I was going to say, but there was something you said that made me think, and then many others. Yeah, that also. But also I'm wondering, because maybe to tag on to the last question, yes, we came here by flying, not only, you know, metaphorically, but actually physically, and very materially. I was wondering, is it possible for us to find questions to any of or find answers to any of the questions that have arisen today by not doing it together? That's really what I was trying to, as I said, it's a beginning of a thinking, but I think that we need to find these solutions together, and I can't really see how we're able to do that without meeting each other. That's really the kind of a bit of the basics and very banal point that I would want to make a bit more fleshy than today. And I think that meeting gives us obligations that we should address whenever we go to where we live, etc., etc. Like I'm not anymore, I cannot see myself as an individual traveler. I travel on behalf of now. I've started to think. So that whenever I come back from here, I will try to share these ideas. I see it's filmed, so it can be shared in different ways, but to really try to do this, the homework that we also put on the delegates for this conference, like what were the interesting points that we today raised that I could bring home and can share with my colleagues, so they didn't have to come, but I will know this conversation and that site and combine them. And if there are really brilliant solutions to a certain problem, we can share them by doing things like this. So I would never, you know, not come to a conference, but I think we should have consequences, and I think that's maybe I think that's another word that I would like to put into the kind of mix of word is consequence, that we are aware of what consequences can be positive and what can be negative. That was a really random rant, but anyway.
I think that's a very like NGO model, right? Like Clinton Foundation, everybody shows up and everybody makes a pledge, whether it's labor or financial, and you commit to doing that like after that meeting, and somebody is basically following up.
I think this is also what I'm thinking of the cultural protocols. We don't have those commitments in the art world because we've been raised in a globalized traveling world where we could travel as much as we wanted. We could, you know, the institutional form that we see today is based on the wrong premise. And I think that why I'm also tempted to use this word protocol and enter culturally into it is that I think that our cultural sector needs to look to, maybe this Clinton model is flawed. It could be, but why don't we look at that and see if we can use parts of it within our fields to do something substantial, because we are part of the problem.
But also, like, I mean, what we learned from when we try to make something sustainable, whatever that means, let's say, you know, when I say deep intellectual care, like instead of 3-month import-export, I opened up the place for 12 months for one artist to produce their dream work, let's say. It was, the artist is on the moon, it's great, it's working for him. The team is on the floor. The team cannot wait to get rid of the infrastructure of the artist because the team is like, we're so happy when it's 3 months circulation, import, export. Why is this burden now, this long-term engagement with the artist? Like on every level, like this is one of the first projects, right? Like, so on every level there are questions, like flights. On the way here, I question, am I flying again? Then I write on Facebook, come everybody to this lecture we're doing. Everybody's like, say don't come. So then I updated my Facebook status, don't come to this panel, because coming means you're, and on my flight, there are 4 flights involved for me to come here, because, you know, I had to fly my kid to my mother so she can be taken care of, so I can come here and I have to go back, pick her up and go back to Berlin. So I'm actually, you know, like if I do the math of this panel, I'm minus 400. Like, but I'm here because this is like what you're doing, right? Like it's amazing, the sustainability and how unsustainable the art world is. I mean, forget about being a mother curator. That's another topic, but yeah.
That's a great panel.
Huh?
I wanted to ask because I'm working on a project that it's really connected with the topic you're talking about. You were talking about this open sources, civic approach, your sustainable projects, and I'm wondering how can this change that we are talking about can come from our everyday practice, actually, and can art institutions become a role model of functioning today? And you were talking also art to liberate, but I also think about art that can support this change. And I'm wondering if there are any, if you were wondering if, because I believe, and I'm preparing a project right now, where I want to show how art can actually support institutions and create like a system for everyday practice. I wanted to ask you, how does, accept the examples that you gave, how does you try to how does your everyday practice in the institutions look like? Do you try to change something from the inside, from the everyday practice? I'm asking all of you.
Okay, so yeah. So first of all, I don't know if I probably didn't explain it well enough, but there is a strong connection with the idea of the everyday practice, like really as like a quotation from Desserteau, meaning that if you imagine the connection that we have with space and place and with strategies and tactics, in which historically art tried to create a blueprint in order to change the city, I'm avoiding that approach, and I'm trying to transform the places that are already existent, the spaces into places, so in flexible structure, through tactics. So the time is very limited, but then I change the use of some of those places, and I try to alter the dynamics. So this would be the use of the notion of everyday practice. Within the institution itself, I try to keep conversations open with artists, even though we have no funding maybe available, so that I refuse this approach that things will only appear when they are feasible financially, so that all of a sudden I need to look for the indigenous artist. But instead, I'm working with whatever artist, and then figuring out when is a good moment for this artist to be supported organically for whatever it is that we want to do together to happen. So in this way, I try not to instrumentalize what we do or the artist does, but to make it really like a natural outcome of a path that we are having together. So really what I'm talking is informal conversation. From time to time, I just chip in, have a Skype call and try to understand how things are going so that maybe in a year or 2 years' time, a residency will happen if we are lucky. So that is a way of integrating an everyday practice and to subvert the modus operandi of the financial infrastructure. As well, I try to question a lot process versus outcome. So to decompress a little bit the pace, because if not, we are just oriented that we need to create something, and it is to be new, and it is to be for this commission. So how is that we can revalue process more organically? And it's not just for the invited artists, but also inside the office, questioning constantly how we communicate, how is that we speak, and questioning how is that we articulate things inside the office. Part of the everyday practice is also that I go to those bars and cafes, not just because I'm Italian and I enjoy food, but because it's just for me to understand how current life is affecting them. Just to give you an example, last June 2018, we were somehow accidental victim of the Glasgow School of Art fire. So we just lived next door to them. So the CCA is located next door to the Glasgow School of Art, and we were closed for almost half a year. This had an effect, not our closure, like the closure of the area had an effect on businesses, on local communities, residents, and lots of people that are either living, operating there. So one of the things that I've been doing was to connect with those people, to understand what was really happening. Not because I have the sources to support their businesses, but just to understand how is that the institution can start to cooperate and merge with some of those social problems. So as you can see, is my position of the everyday is a position of alert, trying to constantly observe what is happening, trying to give a different rhythm and to integrate this in what we do, and to try to refuse all the different tick boxes that somehow are embedded in the institutional work. I don't know if this is the case here, but it's certainly the case in the UK. So how is that we don't exoticize the subjects? How is that we are just working with specific demographic because this is what is requested? Does that answer the question? Yeah, sorry, I'm very passionate about this everyday thing, so I would just expand it forever.
I mean, in the case of the project I mentioned, Cinema Hollanda, which led to the announcement of the name change, the question was raised in the first meeting with the programmers, and the minute I said in that meeting, let's do it, you're right, activists, let's do it, it was seen as colonial repression, because I, as the director, was immediately saying, let's do it, which was, this usually never happens, institutions moving so quickly in the first meeting, but because I was solutionism, like when I was really proposing it, like to join the solution, it was seen really, this is what colonialists do. They suppress our pain, like, okay. Fine. So it was really like a very strange situation because usually institution takes forever to respond. So that's, but what happened is when that question was raised and when I in my head knew this has to change, my team, the Dutch team, said, no way, we will never give up the legacy of this institution. No way, why should we change? We're not racist. We've never done anything wrong, right? That was like immediately the response. It took about 4 months, really, internally. Embrace this artist practice. Really look what's really racist by default in our everyday practice. How things are done at home, how festivals, which festivals are being celebrated by the receptionist, by the PR person, by people started like really, it was such an emotional process of like, I will never teach Pizzwart again. I'm not a racist, but I realize I am so racist in my everyday choices. So it was this incredible internal emotional evolution, and then I asked the team also to host weekly meetings with public, this kind of public, of course. So if we're lucky, to right-wing participants, but maybe not. But every week for 12 weeks, our installation, our technician, our receptionist, our chairman of the board, every week hosted a meeting. About 20, 30 people showed up each time to say, don't change the name, do this, do that. But there are labor conditions we need to address. Like everything that had to be addressed came out. So what I feel more and more is like, yes, the kind of art we show, we need to really embrace it more in our institutional practice. Like if we're really working with this artist because their work is so we need to really take in as well what they are actually asking for, like in the way they are engaging with their topics, with their communities, with their constituencies. It's a hard one. It's not an easy one because it's so easy to show the work and yalla, import, export, bubble wrap, more bubble wrap.
Thank you, because that's what I was asking, like how we can become self-aware. That we are racist without knowing that. It's like this is a very interesting work, and this is something we all must learn. And I think it's a very good work for the institution to do. How we all become self-aware. How the moments that we are racist, why we are racist, how can we stop being racist, and how we can stop, I don't know, whatever, we abuse power or anger. How can we do this? This is, that's why I refer to the past. I mean, how can you cure this? Thank you.
But on the other side, and I don't really know, maybe there's somebody in the audience would know, or panelists, like there's an active sort of campaign for forgetting. Like if we need to heal, if we need to get over our traumas, we need to also engage in active forgetting. Like how can we forget quicker? As a proposition, it's a provocation, something to think about.
Mira, would you like to comment on this, or Anne?
Yes, I mean, they said everything, but yes, I think art institutions in general supposed to be open, inclusive, courageous, which dare to deal with complex existential issues like, for example, climate change. So the significant increase of social interactivity needs adequate infrastructure of social institutions. So we as an institution for the development of cultural capital and social reunion are well placed for the reference for the possible direction of the development of future institutions. However, there is no need to urge the art world to give some solutions on the concrete and complex subject like global warming issue. But there is a certain need that several institutions with different expertise at the world level are urgently active to produce new understanding of the problem at different levels. So that could give another perspective for possible action and form of engagement. Yes.
Anna, would you like? No.
Okay. I would like to say, from the point of artist, I like very much the voice of Vivian Checchia from Glasgow CCA, because the open dialogue space give a chance the artist to give its own voice, to join and to create the politic even. It comes not from, the politic comes not from the center like institution, but it gives a chance the artist to say the truth, like the artist from public, yes? I don't know who and I don't know the person, but I like very much the point of not forgetting the truth. If for instance, someone would send to you a letter from the country like Poland after this evening debate, and give a proposition for event or presentation, what would you say? If we can talk about connection, is it possible or not? If you only hear the voice of the cafe of the person from your country, or are you open for the voices of the artists from, for instance, from Poland? Is it possible to write the letter to Glasgow CCA Centre?
The point about this is promotional moment. Yes, yeah. You are very welcome. Because I should explain better. So the institution is made of the merging of two buildings. We have two shops. They don't belong to us. They don't pay rent, and they are managed by two independent people. One is a gift shop, and one is a bookshop. Then we have a cafe, also not managed by us. Then we have 18 offices that are our cultural tenants, and they pay very low rent to be in the main city center and use our services. And then we have a cinema, a theater, 4 galleries, workshop spaces, and our office, which is an open space. So there are many different ways in which you can get involved with CCA Glasgow. So number one, maybe we have studio visit, me and you, or another curator, the curator of exhibition at the moment, Ainsley Roddick, and you are selected and invited to have a show in the galleries, which is bingo. Free spaces, big galleries, yes. Other option. Yes. Let me finish the propaganda here. So other option is that we have an open call system for residencies, based on like just research without an outcome. So you could apply for a space called the Creative Lab, and you could spend some time with a very small stipend in which you are just thinking about your ideas, developing research, meet with some people if you like, but no obligation for final production. You could also apply for an exhibition space, which is called Intermedia, is supported by the local city council, and you would be in charge of the exhibition from A to Z, meaning you paint the walls, you install your work, you take care of the communication, you take care of the opening. Other option is that you use our publication studio to make a book of your own, or in collaboration with other artists, or you could come and visit us and stay in our flat and just have a visit but not produce anything, or you could be part of the open source, or you could be invited for the public engagement program. So as you can see, it's not just the open source. Scotland is a very small country with a very delicate ecosystem where gallery spaces are disappearing. So in spite of the fact that I'm promoting until death process more than outcome, we still need spaces to exhibit the incredible work of local and international artists. So we really nurture our galleries. Things that can happen in galleries sometimes cannot happen anywhere else. And therefore, we do value what is the production that comes up in the galleries themselves. So it means that we have both a connection with the city, where everybody is invited in and can do their activities and use our spaces, the cinema, the theater, the workshop spaces. And also we value the connection with the artist community, because as you said, it is a community and it is part of our ecosystem. So we are trying, it's not easy, but we are trying to actually satisfy all the people that are in our network and to devote equal attention to local and non-local, to people that are probably temporary visitors or people that are sedentary audiences of Glasgow. So that's part of what we try to achieve.
Okay, yeah. So I think now it's time for the last question or comment, and it will be from
My question
Magda.
is very short, and I would like to address it also to Jarosław. Can you imagine a different form of our today meeting? The form that will still based on what we value the most with the word engagement, which is affective labor, our dedication of time, criticality, etc., etc. What will be absolutely different with its look? I mean, we all are very aesthetic-based because what we appreciate the most with art is we need to look at it. We need to be with it. Our body and our physicality needs to meet at a particular moment, and also this is what we, I think, like the most with the fact of being. But could you imagine a different form of gatherings and being together that also will be realizing the postulates of engagement and sustainability? So how can we be together in the future?
First thing, you change the setup. Like, no, that's the first thing.
I open a new one.
No, to be honest, I hate when people come to the event I'm programming and then they are trying to move the chairs. This is not the correct setup. I don't mean that. I mean, this could have happened in collaboration with, I don't know, a group of farmers that are devoted to permaculture, so that the question about the ecosystem is also expanded as a question with other sectors. Because the thing is that we need to nurture our space for dialogue, but we are in an echo chamber. Inside here, almost nobody would just say, what you are doing is wrong, don't do it. You know, generally...
I'm not saying that. I'm based on what you said also about engagement and Anna, about being together. And my question is, can we imagine all together different forms of being together?
Yeah, I just said, in a farm.
Then, for instance, physical. Or how we can continue with ecology of care, etc., but in different form. Also being inspired by Malibu writing, right? And the question of the form...
I think that we're still in our present, which means that we have certain demands. Some of them were addressed by you. But I think that time is how we need to change things. So I would have loved to sit, like I do with some of my students, to sit around the table for like 6 hours with maybe half this group. Not to discriminate, but that would just be more manageable for a conversation. And then you could have done the same, we could have spent the whole day together. But I also realized that many of you need to go to work, you know, to have a living wage, so the time is really, rather than form, I think, is what I would change. Because then I think we could all come together in this form, sure. It's very comfortable chairs and for us. So I wouldn't necessarily exclude the panel, but I would add to it. And I think that's how I would slowly change the forms of things. No?
What do you have in mind? I was rather thinking also if we can, at a particular moment in the institution, go more into the digital presence. If we can, with Anne before, we had, for instance, Skype conversations, and it's not that I'm really admiring the Skype, but at a particular moment, this was really strong connection and a strong presence. And I'm thinking like on developing a new forms of being together that somehow will bring us more into the future also requirements.
I think that I have to use Skype from time to time in my work because of wonderful things like visa issues. So we're lacking a panelist because of a visa issue. I have at times lacked students that actually have, you know, a place in a formal education in Norway. They cannot travel. That happens for all sorts of different reasons, but mostly for visa reasons. And I would return to time because I think committing to a digital sphere takes a lot more energy than actually sitting down at the table with someone that you're in the same room with. So I think we have to train our brains to be just as present then through digital media as we are able to do here in the space like this. And I think that we'll probably learn that, but I think at this point, again, I'm not equipped. Like, it takes enormous amounts of energy to take meaningful part in a digital presence, I find. And I'm not a gamer, so...
Can I add one thing? Because I think that what happened here, what happens still here, is quite interesting, because there are very different visions of how institutions can function, and there is rather a conversation than an effort to win one of those visions against the other. You see? You see what I mean, right? And I believe this is also because many of us are feminists, perhaps, and we're sort of used to, you know, to have different visions of what, for instance, what feminism is about. And so this is also an interesting element. And this is also, when you asked what we could change, I realized that I'm actually, because to me, this panel is quite different from a lot of panels, not just in art discussions, but also in theoretical discussions, when if we had, you know, I have seen so many panels where with these differences, because there are many, many differences between your approaches, yeah, and your praxis, and yet, so a conversation would not be possible. So I believe this is already something that, actually, this I would like to preserve. So I agree with you, perhaps with time. I would maybe combat capitalism a little bit more, or make it less exploitative, yeah, so that we, yeah, and a little bit less of competition also, but there was no, like, here, what I liked very much about this discussion, apart from the very interesting presentations, each of them, but also this attitude of like, okay, so I do it this way. Let's hear what your praxis is. So some of you mentioned how important this conversation actually is. I cannot agree more. And actually it was nice for, like, so I'm not sure when you asked your questions, so I was thinking what I would change, and not much in the sense that I actually liked it. But
So I think it was a very good last sentence for our panel and a conclusion. So thank you for the audience, and thank you for bringing.